Hey, happy Monday. It's been a long time. I should not have left you.
In 900 feet, turn left on South Laughlin Street.
Maybe I don't need that loud a voice. Let's figure that out here. It's Monday. I haven't talked to you guys in like a whole entire week because I have been out of town. I was in New Orleans, but I'm back, and this Monday feels as Monday as any Monday has ever Mondayed in the history of Mondays. But we're here. Hello, Veronica. Hi, everybody. Yeah, it's Monday. I gotta catch you all up. My trip was great. I had a little snag. I was supposed to be back Wednesday morning, but my flight was canceled because there were electronic issues with the plane. And then there were no more flights back to Chicago that day, so my options were to fly out at the butt crack of dawn the next day or later the evening the next day. Definitely was not flying out at the butt crack of dawn again, because went to the airport Wednesday morning, got up at like 4, only for my flight to be canceled. So flew out Thursday evening, except for my flight was delayed about an hour. And then like when I got off the plane trying to drive home, there was like random traffic at 10 o'clock at night. Yeah, I don't think I got home until like 2 hours after my plane landed. It was rough. New Orleans kidnapped me, but I'm back now. Let's catch up real quick. So last week, like Saturday, Sunday, right? It was this Mars opposition to Jupiter that was perfecting. And that is a really tough aspect. I've seen in natal charts of people who have like a Mars-Jupiter opposition, either they have channeled that energy into being an athlete of some kind, but a lot of times it shows up in the charts of people who struggle with addiction. Unfortunately, that Mars-Jupiter opposition. It's not Neptune that signifies addiction. You got to have Jupiter involved, generally with Mars in some kind of way. The moon, possibly, moon-Jupiter opposition. But yeah, so that was a really rough aspect. It was a really rough transit, and I couldn't even get on here and talk about it because sometimes, like, I'm too busy living the astrology and attending to the life changes that certain astrological configurations correlate to, that I can't really talk about it. So last week was one of those times, the Mars-Jupiter opposition. What else happened? There was a new moon last week, Saturday, in Aries. So we're in this window of like so many planets being in Mars-ruled signs. Mars, anytime planets are in Aries or Scorpio, they are answering to Mars. So right now, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus are all in Aries. And Jupiter is in Scorpio. So that's 4 planets in a Mars-ruled sign. Now, we've had situations where we watch planets align in the pair of signs ruled by a particular planet. So I want to say March of 2018, mid-March, like the last 2 weeks of March 2018, like every planet except for Jupiter was in a Jupiter-ruled sign. So it was like Sun, Mercury, Venus, all in Sagittarius, Mars and in Pisces, and Mars and Saturn in Sagittarius. So when we have those kind of things happen, we pay close attention to the planet that's in charge. So in this case, we're paying close attention to Mars in Gemini. Mars, that's another thing that happened last week. Mars entered Gemini. And with that, we officially began eclipse season. Last week, see, I wasn't on here, so I couldn't talk to you about it, but last week, you should have been paying attention to Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Those 3 days last week set off eclipse eclipse season in a major way, because Mars, the first planet, moving through Gemini, triggering all the Sagittarius and Gemini eclipse degrees. The moon entered Gemini, and if you've been paying attention here or on Twitter, listen very closely. Every single time the moon transits transits each of the four mutable signs, so that's going to be Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, and Virgo, we are in eclipse territory. You have to understand, when we as astrologers talk about a new moon or a full moon or a specific eclipse or a conjunction or square between planets, these things don't just fall out of the sky. They are a part of a larger cycles. They are intertwined with other astrological configurations. So how that translates is that you have a seventh house, for example, in your birth chart, right? The seventh house represents partners, whether they be business or romantic. They represent professionals we might consult. So like doctors, therapists, attorneys, accountants, all of these people who we kind of interact with one-on-one in that kind of way, right? Now, let's say you don't have any planets there, right? This does not mean you don't have a relationship, you don't see doctors or hire an accountant. It doesn't mean that you don't beef with people. It doesn't mean that you've never, been involved in litigation or anything like that, right? Having this house empty in your birth chart does not mean that, right? So in the same way, should a transit come to your seventh house, this does not mean that all of a sudden this activity is awakening in your life. It's like, no, you've seen doctors since you were a child. You've had at least somebody that you were in a relationship with or interested in. So all of that to say that we watch these transits in a cyclical manner. Pay attention to every time that the moon transits Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces, or Virgo, because every time it is progressing your eclipse story in some significant way. And a lot of times you may not notice it until retrospect, until you're looking back over the course of time, but it's always significant. Watch the news cycles when the moon is transiting one of these four signs, like clockwork. I can't even remember what happened last week under the moon in Gemini, but like people were subpoenaed and wasn't bar held in contempt of court. Like it was all contempt of Congress, right? Like it was all happening last week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. That was our kind of first trigger of the eclipses in actual eclipse season. And eclipse season begins as soon as one planet is in a sign where the eclipses occur. So eclipses occur in sign pairs. The eclipses we're watching right now are in Gemini and Sagittarius. Now Saturn has been in Sagittarius. We had a brief visit from Jupiter, and that, what was that, March 29th to April 22nd? Those 3 weeks were important to the eclipse narrative collectively and personally, but we watched specifically Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. I've tweeted this before, and obviously many of you may not have heard this before, but I'll share it again here. When you watch the outer planets, in this case, I'm not talking about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, I'm talking about Jupiter and Saturn. When you watch those outer planets enter new signs and they stay there for a year in the case of Jupiter and 2.5 years in the case of Saturn, it is necessary to pay attention to the personal or quicker moving planets synodic cycle with those planets, with Jupiter and Saturn, in order to really understand. You think of like the quicker moving planets kind of translating and personalizing the transits of Jupiter and Saturn. So now, for example, Mars is in Gemini, and eventually Mars is going to oppose Saturn, right? But at some point Mars was conjunct Saturn, Mars was square Saturn, Mars is going to oppose Saturn, and it'll square Saturn again before it conjuncts. This is all important, and I'm sharing this because when I talk about eclipse season, and last week, for example, when the moon was in Gemini, Mars entered Gemini, this is not like all of a sudden out of the blue something's happening in this house. this story has been building. This is why I come on here and talk about it and try to help you guys pull together a timeline, even if you're not clear on how to interpret the actual placements and transits and things like that. At least being able to connect the timeline makes it very clear to you what thread or narrative is being illuminated by a particular transit, in this case, the eclipses. So that was last week. This week, we've got until, I want to say Thursday, I believe, one of these days, the sun is going to enter Taurus, and then Sunday, I think Mercury's going to enter Taurus. So that little window where we have, 4 planets in a Mars ruled sign is very short. But that gives us even more reason to pay attention, because it gives it a kind of unique flavor that once it's over, we'll be able to discern kind of a shift occurring. So Mars in Gemini is a tough placement. Mars wants to get things done. Mars wants to act and move and be. Mars wants to use its strength, flex its will. It wants to take action, and generally kind of being physical is a very important part of the fiery side of Mars. The watery side of Mars, of course, is Scorpio, where Jupiter is, and that is the part of Mars that is about instinct, the survival instinct, the unconscious force that compels us to preserve our body, that possesses our body, possesses our mind. We are not in control of the survival instinct. And this Jupiter in Scorpio transit, which again is kind of being magnified right now, and I'll get to that in a minute with the full moon in Scorpio coming this week. But this particular Jupiter in Scorpio transit is drawing our attention, drawing our focus, bringing into conscious awareness the ways in which our survival instinct shapes our understanding about the world, our belief about ourselves. I call it a narrative of self, right? We all have a narrative of self. We all tell stories about who we are that generally are correlated to certain experiences. I'm this way because my mom did this to me. I'm that way because I went through this and I lived there and I grew up here and I went to school here and I studied this right? We have this narrative of self that's rooted in experiences, personally, experiences relationship-wise. All Jupiter transits have you questioning the narrative. In Scorpio, we are questioning the narrative of self as it pertains to the survival instinct. You think that you are who you are because of some event or circumstances that you are consciously aware of, when in fact, there are so many things that have occurred that have shaped your self-perception, your experience of your body, how you show up in the world and in relationship, that really you may not have made the connection. And so Jupiter is like, the things that you are conscious of in your mind, the correlations that you make between who you are or how you see yourself and maybe the events or people that have shaped that, right? You're not always aware of that. And so this Jupiter in Scorpio transit has been very triggering for a lot of people. I've had a lot of clients have their panic and disorder and anxiety disorder kicking up. PTSD triggers have been pretty prominent for some of my clients, because all of those things, anxiety, depression, panic, PTSD, all of these things are the survival instinct trying to keep us alive. PTSD, anxiety, all of these things tend to come or arise out of specific experiences in our lives. And those experiences are like, okay, this is a threat, this is a threat, this is a threat. This threat is so threatening to your sense of self and the survival and well-being of your body that this experience, right, is such a threat that it permanently changes the neurological makeup of your brain and your experience of your body, to the point that now your body is kind of stuck in this threat detection mode. This is why I talk about Scorpio as not being manipulative. Scorpio does not care about you. Scorpio doesn't care about you. Scorpio is about sustaining the self. So with that being said, all of this Mars action going on, we do have a full moon in Scorpio this week. And as I mentioned on my Twitter thread, whenever we get to that full moon and that new moon and then that full moon in the sign where Jupiter transits each year, so last year we would have had a full moon in Libra earlier in the year, while Jupiter was still in Libra. And then December 7th of 2018, Jupiter had been in Scorpio probably for about 2 months at that time. And we had a new moon in Scorpio inaugurating, in a way, this Jupiter in Scorpio transit. 6 months later, here we are at the full moon in Scorpio, bringing us a culmination. So go look at your text conversations, your emails. If you have the 2018 Sidereal Astrology Guide, you should go back and look in that, check your journal, all of that stuff. What was going on at the beginning of December, probably the first 2 weeks of December 2018? There was a Mercury retrograde in Scorpio going on. The sun was in Scorpio. Jupiter was in Scorpio. We had a new moon in Scorpio. So your Scorpio house was getting charged up for everything that had transpired since then in that part of your chart. So what was going on at that time for you? Go back and look. Can you make a connection to where you are at present? Thinking about, last week in the Mars in Taurus opposed Jupiter in Scorpio. Mars was the first planet to oppose Jupiter. Now the sun is, and then Mercury is, and then Venus will be the last planet to oppose Jupiter in Scorpio. So watching all of these oppositions, I have talked about safety first. I have talked about Taurus and Scorpio in a lot of different ways. Both are viable, both represent viable adaptations we take on to survive. Taurus, if we start with Scorpio as a water signs are always talking about instinct, meaning something that we're not conscious of. It's in the body, it's in the biology and the physiology. Scorpio is the survival instinct, the instinct to survive. That means any means necessary, keep myself alive, sometimes at the expense of other people and relationships, but self-preservation first, second, third, and last. That's Scorpio, right? And so the survival instinct is something that we hold in our bodies in a kind of genetic inheritance, right? On many different levels. Being a part of a certain species, we inherit certain adaptations in order to survive. Being in a particular locale, right? Dependent on the climate, dependent on the weather. We have these different ways that we survive and adapt, okay? And then when we talk about in a more hereditary sense, right? With our immediate families and our experiences with our caregivers, our early experiences of whether the world was safe, whether we could trust, right? We have those adaptations that are a manifestation of the survival instinct. So this Jupiter in Scorpio, this full moon in Scorpio is on all of those levels. What are the collective adaptations we have taken on as a means to survive? Are they relevant? Do we need to adjust? Do we need to tell a new story? Absolutely. Climate change is a real threat. And so on the species level, right, of survival, we have adaptations that we need to consciously take on and create in order to survive. Now, again, we go all of those levels down and we get to the personal. We get to the adaptations that are a individual response to our family and upbringing. Was home and family safe? Was it dangerous? Could you trust your caregivers to show up? Could you not trust them, right? All of those things shape our survival instinct into adulthood. They shape our capacity to have healthy attachment in our relationships. If we experienced our caregivers and the world as safe and trustworthy, we tend to have a more secure attachment, and we don't perceive a threat of abandonment or rejection from our caregivers or lovers. However, should that not be the case, now it gets complicated, right? We have, some of us are avoidant in our attachment style, and so we might find it difficult to have good boundaries, right? I was just talking about this with a friend last night about passive aggressive boundary setting looks like not communicating to your partner or significant other or family member that you're tired, you don't want to talk, or I don't have time, right? Not being explicit about the boundary, but being implicit and passive about the boundary. Not answering the phone, ignoring text messages, going ghost and MIA, all of those things, right? All of these ways of relating and our sense of attachment and security in relationships goes back to our earliest caregivers and our earliest shaping of our survival instinct. This is really heavy stuff. I've had to start therapy. And I remember at the beginning of this Jupiter and Scorpio transit, back in September and October and November, I was tweeting like, listen, this is not what you think it is. Scorpio is not about sex. It is not about manipulation, and it is not about, all of these, ways in which someone's trying to use you or take advantage of you or seduce you. Like, give me a break. That's not what people have been experiencing. So the fact of the matter is, we watch people around us react to us in ways that are not indicative of our personal interaction, but it's indicative of their own trauma and experiences. This full moon in Scorpio is such a great time to really think about, am I showing up in my relationships and partnerships as a reaction to my own trauma, or am I dealing with the person in front of me? Can I deal with the person in front of me as they are, or am I bringing to this relationship, this person, something else? 99.9% of us are bringing our stuff to the relationship, and we need to be able to say that. We need to be able to say, this is what is inhibiting me from thriving, and that's what Taurus is about. Scorpio is survive, keep the body alive, keep the body alive. But Taurus is about thriving, and we thrive in community. We survive with a healthy sense of entitlement to life and body, and we thrive in community and relationship. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot. So this full moon in Scorpio, the sun will be in Taurus, the moon is in Scorpio at this moment, and we are on this axis, this narrative, this story of surviving versus thriving, right? And how do we integrate these two things? The moon in Scorpio is in exile, right? It is not at home. It's far away from home. It is in antagonistic territory, right? Moon is about safety and trust. It is about belonging. It is about the tribe. It is about family and mother. It is about home, all of the things that are familiar. But when you have moon in Scorpio, your individual survival becomes more important than belonging and community, which often means why, right? It means we have to ask why. Why can you not trust your mother, your family, your home, your familiar environment? Why can't you trust it to keep you safe? Why do you have to look out for self, right? These are real experiences that shape those things. So at this full moon in Scorpio, all of this is coming up. All of this about feeling in exile versus feeling validated, right? Taurus talks about the entitlement to being validated and accepted in relationship and partnership, right? Anytime we're talking about a Venus ruled sign, how willing are we to conform and adapt in order to be in relationship and in order to participate in community? And Taurus and Scorpio, every time we get this opposition, we get this, the Mars-Jupiter opposition last week across Taurus and Scorpio, the Sun-Moon opposition across Taurus and Scorpio, eventually the Sun-Jupiter opposition, Mercury-Jupiter, and Venus-Jupiter opposition, right? We are asking ourselves to refrain from going to extremes. You cannot be so looking out for self, so self-interested that you isolate yourself, that you don't have friends, you don't have family, right? It's one thing to say, my family isn't safe, I don't trust them. It's another thing to apply that as a blanket statement to everyone in your life, right? Whether consciously or unconsciously, right? Unconsciously creating distance by not being straight up about saying, I need space, or this is making me uncomfortable, or, not on triggers. Understanding that we have patterns. We all have patterns in relationships that often keep us from getting the love that we receive. But understand that this is all about, entitlement to life and body, Scorpio, and entitlement to validation, right? You are entitled to be validated and loved and accepted. You are entitled to thrive and not just survive. You are entitled to experience comfort and not just the bare minimum, right? Not just the bare minimum. So how can we apply that to our lives? I don't know. It's up to you guys. I had to go. This has been great. I said a lot. Hopefully it'll make it up on YouTube at some point today. I love y'all. Thanks for coming back and joining me today. I'll check in again with you guys. Let's see, the sun enters Taurus. Oh, that's what I meant to tell you. Full moon tarot divination. That is going to be that is probably going to be on Wednesday the 15th. Wednesday the 15th, I should be on YouTube with my tarot cards doing a full moon in Scorpio tarot divination. You're welcome, y'all. Thanks for tuning in. I'll try to create a graphic to remind y'all. Sorry if I don't. Eclipse special is like over. Y'all booked up all the slots. I might offer something a little bit later for those of you who missed out, but keep your ear to the wire. I had to figure out how I'm going to rectify that because I know not enough people were able to take advantage of that. But I didn't forget about y'all. I'll talk to y'all. Bye.